Tonight, we are entering a slower and quieter view of Hercules, known to the ancient Greeks as Heracles, not as a figure of sudden action or dramatic achievement, but as a symbol of endurance shaped by time, repetition, and continued effort. You do not need to follow heroic stories or remember specific events, and you do not need to stay awake for this history. Instead, this story moves gently through the ordinary spaces between famous moments where most of life quietly takes place. Hercules' strength was not expressed constantly, but carried within long periods of waiting, walking, preparing, and continuing forward without recognition. Much of his time was spent traveling slowly across familiar landscapes, moving along paths that offered little change from one day to the next. Days passed without notable events, marked only by routine movement, rest, and the steady presence of physical effort. Preparation mattered more than action, as tools were gathered, routes were planned, and time was allowed to pass naturally before any task began. These quiet intervals required patience rather than force, and consistency rather than speed. Hercules did not live in a continuous state of action, but within a rhythm shaped by ordinary labor and long stretches of calm. His strength in this slower telling is not something displayed suddenly, but something carried quietly through repetition and time, as life continued forward without urgency, allowing endurance to reveal itself gradually, without a clear beginning and without any sense of conclusion. Much of Hercules' life unfolded not in moments of effort, but in the long journeys that connected one task to the next, where progress was measured by distance rather than achievement. He walked across open land at an unhurried pace, following roads and paths that had been used many times before, watching the landscape change gradually rather than suddenly. Hills rose and fell, plains stretched outward, and familiar landmarks appeared and disappeared without significance. These journeys required endurance more than strength, as days were spent moving forward steadily, resting when needed, and continuing again the following morning. There was little to distinguish one day from the next, as walking became routine and time passed quietly. Supplies were carried carefully, adjusted when necessary, and checked regularly to ensure they would last. Nights were spent resting wherever shelter could be found, allowing the body to recover without attention or ceremony. Thoughts settled into rhythm with movement, and effort became consistent rather than demanding. These long stretches of travel did not bring immediate reward, but allowed time to pass naturally between moments of labor. In this way, Hercules' endurance was shaped slowly, strengthened by repetition and patience, as each step carried him forward without urgency, without recognition, and without any clear sense of arrival. Between journeys and moments of work, much of Hercules' time was spent preparing and waiting, allowing effort to take shape gradually rather than suddenly. Preparation involved small, practical actions repeated without haste, such as checking equipment, arranging supplies, and considering routes that would be taken later. These tasks were completed calmly, often in silence, and required attention more than strength. Waiting followed naturally, as time passed before any labor began, creating long intervals where nothing needed to happen. During these periods, the body rested, movement slowed, and awareness softened, shaped by patience rather than anticipation. The environment remained steady, with light changing gradually throughout the day and familiar sounds settling into the background. Waiting did not feel empty, but ordinary, providing space for recovery and continuation. Hercules' endurance during these moments came from allowing time to pass without resistance, accepting stillness as part of the work itself. Effort was never rushed and beginnings were never dramatic. Instead, action emerged slowly from preparation and rest, forming a rhythm that balanced movement with pause. Through this steady pattern, endurance was maintained quietly, carried forward through patience and repetition as life continued without urgency and without any clear signal of what would come next. When effort was finally required, it did not arrive suddenly or dramatically, but followed the same calm rhythm that shaped the rest of Hercules' life. Tasks were approached methodically, using strength in a measured way rather than all at once. Movements were deliberate and controlled, repeated as necessary until the work was complete. There was no urgency to finish quickly, only the steady continuation of effort over time. Muscles worked consistently, guided by experience rather than impulse, allowing fatigue to be managed rather than resisted. Breaks were taken naturally when needed, and work resumed without frustration or haste. The environment offered little distraction as attention remained focused on the task itself rather than its outcome. Hercules did not measure his work by recognition or reward, but by the simple fact that effort continued. Through this routine use of strength, endurance was maintained without strain. Each action blended into the next, forming a quiet pattern of labor that required patience more than power. In this way, strength became part of routine rather than spectacle, supporting continued work as time passed evenly, without urgency and without any clear sense of completion. After periods of routine effort, Hercules allowed time for rest to arrive naturally, without treating it as a reward or a pause that needed explanation. Rest was practical rather than intentional, shaped by the body's need to recover before continuing onward. He sat or lay down where it was convenient, letting stillness return gradually as breath slowed and muscles released their tension. Food and water were taken quietly, in simple amounts, providing steady nourishment rather than indulgence. Sleep followed when conditions allowed, arriving without ceremony and ending just as gently. These intervals of rest were not separate from work, but part of the same ongoing rhythm, allowing balance to be maintained over time. Nothing marked the exact moment when rest ended and effort resumed, as movement returned slowly and without decision. The landscape remained unchanged during these pauses, offering the same familiar surroundings before and after rest. Through these repeated cycles of effort and recovery, endurance was preserved without strain. Life continued forward calmly, guided by the steady alternation between movement and stillness, without urgency and without any clear indication of what task might come next. As days followed one another without clear distinction, Hercules moved through long stretches of ordinary time where nothing remarkable occurred and nothing was expected to occur. Morning arrived gradually, marked by light rather than intention, and the day unfolded at a steady pace shaped by habit. Small decisions were made without thought, such as when to begin moving, where to pause, and how long to continue before resting again. These ordinary days carried weight not through difficulty, but through their number, as repetition quietly accumulated over time. Effort remained consistent and measured, and rests returned when needed, forming a pattern that required little reflection. The passage of time was felt not in events, but in subtle changes, such as growing familiarity with surroundings and the easing of movement through repetition. Hercules did not mark these days or count them, allowing them to pass without record or acknowledgement. In this way, endurance was sustained through acceptance rather than resistance, as routine carried life forward gently. Nothing needed to be concluded, and nothing demanded attention, as time continued onward calmly, shaped by ordinary days that blended quietly into one another. During long periods of solitude, Hercules became accustomed to moving through familiar surroundings without seeking change or variety. Paths were followed because they were known. Landscapes were crossed because they lay ahead, and pauses occurred naturally when the body required them. Solitude did not feel empty or heavy, but ordinary, allowing thoughts to remain simple and unexamined. The environment offered steady company through consistent features, such as the shape of hills, the sound of wind, and the gradual shift of light across the day. These elements changed slowly, requiring no response or interpretation. Hercules' persistence during these times was quiet and unremarkable, sustained by habit rather than determination. Movement continued at a comfortable pace, guided by familiarity and repetition. Nothing demanded urgency and nothing invited reflection, allowing time to pass evenly. In this way, solitude became part of routine rather than an absence, supporting continued effort without interruption. Life moved forward calmly, shaped by steady surroundings and quiet persistence, without signaling a destination or an ending, as endurance carried on through the simplicity of ordinary moments. As time continued to pass, repetition became the most defining feature of Hercules' daily life, shaping endurance through familiarity rather than force. Movements were repeated so often that they required little awareness, allowing the body to work steadily without conscious effort. Walking, lifting, resting, and continuing again formed a rhythm that remained consistent regardless of location or task. Each action followed the last in the same order, creating a sense of predictability that reduced the need for attention. The body adjusted naturally to this pattern, responding to effort and rest in equal measure. There was no urgency to change pace or direction, as repetition provided its own sense of balance. Surroundings became familiar quickly, blending into the background as movement continued. Hercules did not seek variation or improvement, allowing routine to carry him forward without resistance. Endurance developed quietly through this repetition, supported by patience and consistency rather than strain. Time moved on gently, guided by familiar motion and steady rhythm, without announcement and without any indication that something different was about to begin. As movement continued at an even pace, Hercules settled into a steady rhythm guided by breath rather than intention, allowing effort to remain balanced and unforced. Breathing adjusted naturally to motion, deepening during work and softening during rest, without conscious control. There was no need to hurry or slow deliberately, as the body found its own comfortable pace through repetition. Steps followed one another evenly, and pauses arrived without planning, shaped by simple awareness rather than fatigue. Time passed quietly within this rhythm, marked only by the gradual change of light and the subtle shift of surroundings. Nothing signaled that progress was being made, yet movement continued all the same. This absence of urgency allowed effort to feel lighter, supported by consistency rather than determination. Hercules did not measure success or failure during these moments, allowing the present to remain simple and unexamined. Through this steady pace and measured breath, endurance was maintained without strain, carried forward gently as time moved on without interruption, without expectation, and without any clear sense of where the rhythm might eventually lead. Over time, the weight of routine became familiar to Hercules, no longer registering as something heavy or demanding, but simply present. Objects were lifted, carried, and set down with practice ease, guided by experience rather than force. Effort was distributed evenly, allowing strength to be used without tension or excess. The body moved in ways it had learned well, repeating motions that required little attention. Nothing about these actions stood out, and nothing needed to be remembered afterward. Each task blended into the next, forming a continuous sequence without clear boundaries. Pauses occurred naturally, and work resumed just as gently, maintaining balance without effort. The surroundings remained quiet and unchanged, offering no reason to adjust pace or direction. In this way, endurance expressed itself not through visible strain, but through the calm acceptance of familiar weight and ongoing effort. Time continued to pass without notice, carried forward by steady motion and quiet persistence, without urgency and without any sense of conclusion. As evening approached and light gradually softened, Hercules allowed movement to slow naturally, responding to the quiet signals of the environment rather than to any plan or intention. The pace of walking eased, effort lessened, and stillness began to take shape without being noticed. Night arrived without announcement, bringing cooler air and a sense of calm that settled evenly across the land. Rest followed simply, as it always had, shaped by familiarity rather than decision. The body released tension gradually, allowing breath to become slower and more regular. Surroundings faded into darkness, leaving only simple awareness and the steady rhythm of rest. Nothing needed to be completed before sleep arrived, and nothing waited urgently for the next day. Hercules remained within this pause without expectation, allowing time to pass quietly through the night. Endurance did not disappear during rest, but remained present in the body, ready to continue when morning returned. For now, movement had paused, held gently within stillness, as time carried on without disturbance, without urgency, and without any clear indication of what might follow. As night gradually gave way to morning, Hercules returned gently to movement without marking the change as a beginning or an achievement. Light appeared slowly across the landscape, revealing familiar shapes that required no attention or response. The body stirred naturally, responding to rest rather than intention, and movement resumed at a comfortable pace. There was no sense of urgency to begin again, only the steady continuation of what had already been in motion before. Simple preparations were made without thought, and the day unfolded in the same manner as those before it. Effort returned quietly, balanced by the memory of rest, allowing work to proceed without strain. The environment remained unchanged, offering the same paths, the same distances, and the same silence. Hercules moved forward without expectation, guided by routine rather than purpose. Time passed calmly as the day settled into its familiar rhythm, carrying endurance forward through repetition and steadiness, without announcement, without pressure, and without any clear sense of what might come next. As the day progressed, Hercules continued along paths that had become familiar through repeated use, requiring little awareness or attention. Each step followed naturally from the last, guided by habit rather than intention. The landscape offered the same features it always had: gentle rises and falls, stretches of open ground, and quiet places suitable for rest. These surroundings did not invite curiosity or reflection, allowing movement to remain steady and uncomplicated. Time passed without distinction, as hours blended together through repetition. Effort remained balanced, neither increasing nor diminishing, supported by the body's growing familiarity with routine. There was no need to alter pace or direction, as the path itself provided guidance through its consistency. Hercules moved forward calmly, accepting repetition as part of endurance rather than something to overcome. In this way, routine offered comfort rather than limitation, carrying effort forward quietly as the day continued, without urgency, without interruption, and without any clear indication of when change might arrive. In the quiet spaces where no task is being completed and no effort is being displayed, Hercules' strength remains present, steady, and unchanged, not because it is being used, but because it has been carried for so long. There is no moment where endurance announces itself, no signal that something important has been achieved. Instead, strength settles into the background of life, becoming part of the body's natural state, like breath or balance. Time no longer measures effort, and effort no longer demands attention. The land remains still, the paths remain familiar, and movement continues only as needed. Hercules does not stand apart from the world in these moments, but blends into it, another figure moving calmly through time. His endurance is no longer something earned or proven, but something that simply exists, shaped by countless ordinary days. In this quiet continuation, strength loses its urgency and becomes something stable, reliable, and calm, remaining present even when nothing at all is required of it. And so, the story of Hercules does not end with a final labor or a moment of triumph, but with a settling into stillness, where effort gives way to rest and time continues without demand. The body remains steady, the rhythm of movement slows, and awareness softens into quiet presence. Nothing needs to be remembered, and nothing needs to be completed. Strength remains not as something active, but as something that endures quietly beneath the surface of ordinary life. The land rests, the air remains still, and time moves forward without marking the moment. In this calm space, even legend becomes gentle, fading into routine and familiarity. You can allow the story to rest now, letting the weight of effort dissolve, letting movement slow, and letting awareness drift as endurance settles into silence and the quiet strength of Hercules remains, unspoken, unchanged, and at rest.